First story, since 2011, my wife, Mary, and I have been together, tying the knot in 2014, and now blessed with two children, a 4-year-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. Mary's lifelong friend, Izzy, has been an integral part of our lives, standing by as the maid of honor at our wedding and becoming the godmother to our son. Recently, tensions arose between Izzy's brother and one of Mary's co-workers, allegedly stemming from Izzy's brother's inability to handle the co-worker's independence. While I'm not fully privy to the details from Izzy's perspective, their friendship is currently strained. Frankly, I'm not invested in their drama. This morning, Izzy reached out urgently, expressing her belief that I deserve better and hinting at something from Mary's past. Upon calling her, Izzy revealed a shocking truth. My older brother, James, shared a significant history with Mary before I even met her. Their closeness extended from 2005 to 2010, a period I had no inkling of. According to Izzy, James was more of a fling for Mary, who perceived him as the one who got away. She even likened my relationship with Mary to being a consolation prize, as Mary saw in me a resemblance to James. Mary allegedly called James when I asked for her number, requesting secrecy about their history, which James agreed to out of guilt for leading Mary on and his own relationship commitments elsewhere. Reflecting back on family gatherings, I now recall the ease between Mary and James, with him even expressing support for our relationship. Izzy apologized for dropping this bombshell, particularly considering our two children. Stuck in a whirlwind of emotions, I appreciate Izzy's honesty but feel utterly alone in processing this bombshell. My therapist is unavailable, and discussing this with family or mutual friends feels impossible, given their adoration for Mary. Despite my half-hearted dismissal of suspicions regarding Mary's fidelity with James, doubts gnaw at me, questioning the foundation of the past decade of my life. I feel blindsided, wondering if I would have ever pursued a relationship, let alone marriage and children, had I known Mary's history with my brother. The uncertainty gnaws at me, challenging the authenticity of our connection. Though James resides hours away and presumably prioritizes his own family, I can't shake the feeling of betrayal and the shadow of doubt cast over our relationship. It's a situation I'm grappling with, torn between confronting Mary and navigating the turbulent waters of uncertainty. So let me catch you up on the roller coaster that's been my life lately. Picture this. I finally decided to have a heart-to-heart with my brother about the whole truth behind him and my wife's history. But let me tell you, he was as tight-lipped as a clam. All he threw my way was some vague stuff about how he did me a favor by keeping some ex out of our lives. I pressed for more, but he just dodged the questions like a pro. Then, out of the blue, my wife hits me up, saying she's on her way to spill some tea. Apparently, my brother James beat her to the punch and dropped the bombshell on her. Next thing I know, she's at the door, eyes all watery. Now, I couldn't tell if it was legit or if she was just putting on a show. Instead of a straight-up apology, she's firing off questions about who spilled the beans. Classic deflecting move, right? Turns out, there's some crazy drama between my wife and her beastie Izzy. Something about Izzy's brother causing trouble at Mary's workplace, and it's got Izzy's whole family in a bind. My wife's been holed up with her sister since April, and she's been keeping me in the dark about all this drama. She's scared I'll take Izzy's side, because I'm tight with her fam. But let's be real, I would have had her back if the situation was legit. So we're sitting there, trying to hash things out over coffee, and my wife starts spilling about her talks with James. Turns out, it was his bright idea to keep their history under wraps, thinking I wouldn't have given Mary a chance if I knew. And get this, when Mary had doubts about us early on, she turned to James for advice. The guy even spun some tales about me to convince her to stick around. And here's the kicker, my wife straight up admits she started dating me, because I reminded her of James. But hey, she stuck with me for who I am, apparently. When I grilled her about keeping all this under wraps for a decade, she just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. Can you believe that? Like, she would have happily kept me in the dark forever if Izzy hadn't stirred the pot. However, when she started sobbing, I managed to calm myself down and not let my anger get the best of me. She looked vulnerable, and her repeated apologies only made me feel worse. After she composed herself a bit, I told her that her words didn't really ease my concerns, and I still felt like our relationship was always overshadowed by James. This made her cry again, and she pleaded for my forgiveness, expressing her love for our family and for me. I asked her for some space, and she went back to her sister's house where the kids were staying. As she was leaving, she kept telling me she loves me and that she would return later. She tried to kiss me goodbye, but I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. I felt guilty because it was the first time I had ever denied her a kiss. Anyway, over the next 2 days, every single person from my wife's friends and family contacted me to hurl insults at me. Even her sister, who had just given birth, told me she always knew I didn't deserve her sister and that she would find a top-notch divorce lawyer. Her so-called new best friend, who used to be second best, also called me and called me an idiot for believing Izzy, warning me that she would ruin my life. Despite my attempts to clarify that I wasn't involved with Izzy, she didn't listen and even wished that I would contract HIV from Izzy. Ridiculous, right? I should note that Izzy never bothered to call me again after her initial revelations. Then James had the audacity to call me once more, telling me not to be an idiot. Well, that conversation quickly turned into a shouting match because I can't stand that piece of crap with his seemingly perfect life. As for my wife, she never bothered to call me. Instead, she sent me a text saying that she would return on Monday morning with the kids, and we could continue our conversation. Then, I expressed my displeasure about how I had been insulted by everyone she knows, and she justified herself by saying that she had to share something because she couldn't stop crying. I didn't respond further. That's it. I've heard my wife's side of the story, and honestly, it's even worse than when I first heard it from Izzy. These past 2 days, I've been drowning my sorrows with my buddies, drinking and trying to distract myself. They even suggested getting back at Izzy, but I won't stoop to that level. I just feel like a lifeless shell of a person. I always wanted to be a pilot like James, but I couldn't pass the physical exam. I hate my accounting job, and to top it all off, I'm living in a cramped apartment with a wife who deep down would have preferred to be with my successful brother in the first place. What's even more frustrating is that it feels like my wife didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. All she did was say sorry and cry. I deserved more than that. Update. So, let's just say I decided to file for divorce. I made an effort to forgive both my wife and my brother. I kept telling myself that it all happened before I even entered the picture. We even went to marriage counseling, and I saw individual counseling as well, but nothing seemed to work. I just can't move past the deception and lies that were thrown at me. Funny enough, Mary actually admitted that she saw this day coming. She didn't think it would come through her former best friend Izzy, but she acknowledged that she built our marriage on a lie, pretending that she hadn't slept with her husband's brother for years before she met me. I really gave it my all, guys. I truly did. We have a 4-year-old daughter and a delicate 1-year-old son, who had to spend a lot of time in the NICU after he was born. Will they blame me in 20 years for not being able to overcome this issue? Will they end up struggling with obsession or something because of a broken home? It's a heavy weight to bear. Anyway, my wife moved back to her parents' house, and even her parents called me, begging for my forgiveness. They knew about my brother's involvement all along. I reassured them that it's not their fault, but rather their daughter's, and I wish them well. We haven't established a custody arrangement yet, but I'm taking the kids whenever I get the chance. I also asked my brother to give me some space for the next few years while I try to recover. He said he would comply with my request, but not without adding that I'll end up alone and regret this decision until my last breath or something like that. That's the situation, folks. Oh, by the way, I did sleep with Izzy 2 days ago. It's all good though, because I found out that my ex-wife has also started sleeping with someone else. Anyways, the hookup with Izzy was really, really bad. I think she even faked her finish. She wants to go on a vacation with me next month, but I don't think that's a good idea. Second story, so here's the deal. I'm 32, a dude, and I've already started the process of getting a divorce from my soon-to-be ex-wife, who's 27. I'm currently in Kentucky while she's in Florida with our 14-month-old child. This is a pretty intense and dramatic situation, which is why I'm using a throwaway account because my soon-to-be ex-wife knows my regular Reddit account. Normally, I don't share personal stuff online, but right now, I'm feeling incredibly alone and could really use some support. Let me give you a little background story. When I was 18, I was in a messed-up relationship with a woman. Despite using birth control, we ended up having a child together. She cheated on me multiple times, but the worst part was when she cheated on me with my best friend. Let's call him James. It absolutely crushed me. I cut off all contact with my friend for years, but eventually, I managed to pick myself up and reach out to him. He expressed deep remorse and apologized profusely, and against my better judgment, I forgave him. At that time, I felt like this woman had isolated me from all my close friends, and I didn't want to lose my oldest childhood friend because of her actions. So, unfortunately, this becomes relevant in the story later on. Alright, let me catch you up to the present. So, I now have custody of my 13-year-old son, and I was happily married for a while. My wife comes from a super wealthy family, while I had a tough upbringing with financial struggles, like not always having enough food. My parents got divorced, and I lived with my mom who was on disability. By the time I turned 30, I had a good job running a land surveying business with my licensed surveyor dad. My wife was pursuing her bachelor's degree, and I was working full-time while also working towards my associate's degree. Things seemed okay on the surface, but looking back now, I'm realizing there were so many warning signs that I overlooked because I was in love. One thing that stood out was my wife's constant struggles with school. It seemed odd to me that she was having such a hard time while I was doing well in my studies and working full-time. She would get upset with me for getting good grades. So to avoid conflict, I started lying to her and telling her I got average grades, C's, when in reality, I was maintaining a nearly perfect grade point average. I tried my best to support and encourage her in her schoolwork, but it eventually got to the point where I ended up doing her homework for her because she claimed she was too overwhelmed to do it herself. When the pandemic hit, my job took a hit and my income decreased. We were still managing financially, but it was tighter. Despite her being on birth control, she ended up getting pregnant, and we had a child together. It was during her pregnancy that things started going downhill. About 2 months before our daughter was born, her dad passed away due to COVID, which caused a lot of grief and sadness. Our daughter was born in March 2021, and I made a decision to take time off work to be as involved as possible in her life. I really wanted to establish a strong bond with my daughter, so I took several months off, and when I eventually returned to work, it was only part-time. My wife was dealing with postpartum depression, and I had read online that the best thing to do in such situations is to offer as much help as possible, so that's exactly what I did. I regularly took care of my wife, making her breakfast in bed, and I devoted myself to taking great care of our daughter. My wife has always been terrible at doing household chores. She dislikes cleaning, doing dishes, and cooking dinner, so we used to hire people to clean our house. However, since my income decreased, I had to take on these responsibilities myself. Fortunately, I actually enjoyed doing these tasks, so I happily took care of them. But over time, the weight of these responsibilities started to burden me. I decided to seek therapy for help, and initially, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So, here's the thing. That diagnosis got switched up later to ADHD, and now I'm getting the right treatment for it. During this time, my wife started showing some troubling signs. She accused me of cheating with my therapist, which was total nonsense. Whenever I went to work, she'd demand I come home right away to help with our baby. She'd also open up to me about feeling frustrated with our little one, admitting she struggled not to shake her, which really worried me. Her temper was flaring up, and while she always had a short fuse, it was getting worse. There were times she did some pretty awful stuff in front of my family and our kid. I'd end up apologizing for her and trying to fix things, but getting into all those details would just drag this story out even more. So things started falling apart around July 2021. I wake up at 4 a.m. to my wife screaming at our 4-month-old, rocking her way too hard in an attempt to get her to sleep because she's crying. It jolts me awake, and I sit up, telling her to give me the baby so I can handle it. She looks ashamed, like she got caught red-handed. I tell her she's scaring the baby and needs to hand her over, which she does reluctantly before going back to sleep. I take care of our little one and put her back down, but I can't shake what just happened. It's tough to swallow. I head off to work that day, but the whole thing's weighing heavy on my mind. When I get back home, my wife's all fired up, wanting to have it out and defend her actions. But I tell her I can't deal with it right then. All I want is a shower and to take our dog to the vet appointment, and we can talk later. But she won't give me any space, keeps hounding me around the house, refusing to let me breathe. Eventually, I step outside, and she's still yelling, not willing to give me the peace I need. I call her out on her anger problems, telling her she only seems to care about herself, pushing her to do better. And what does she do? takes a big step forward and slaps me hard. I don't hit back, just slump down feeling a mix of shock and sadness, saying, "Look what you've done now." I head upstairs and sit on the toilet, shedding a few tears. And you know what? She follows me up there. But instead of apologizing, she starts explaining how she got defensive, how my words triggered her, because they reminded her of her crappy parents. I can't believe she's not saying sorry, justifying what she did instead. Feeling overwhelmed, I decide to ditch my shower plans and head out to take our dog to the vet. While I'm there, she's calling up some of my family, asking them to take her to a mental hospital for treatment. So when I got back, she had already taken off for the hospital, texting me how sorry she was. She ended up getting diagnosed with postpartum issues, and even though it took some time, I tried my best to forgive her and be understanding. Once she got back from the hospital, things seemed to get back to normal for a bit. But then, about 3 days later, she asked me why I seemed distant. I told her it was tough for me to deal with the fact that she had hit me. Then she brings up this claim from years back, saying I threw a hairbrush at her and that she forgave me for it. Honestly, I couldn't even remember doing that. But suddenly, it was being used against me, and I felt like I had to apologize for something I didn't even recall happening. Now, looking back, I'm pretty sure it never even went down like that. A few months later, her stepmom in Florida was diagnosed with lung cancer and offered to buy us a $400 K house there. It was a big deal, because it meant moving from Kentucky, plus my old buddy James was down there too, and I was looking forward to reconnecting with him. So we went ahead and bought the house, but things got complicated when it came to moving my 13-year-old son from Kentucky to Florida. I totally got where his mom was coming from, wanting him to stay close, and I started thinking maybe we shouldn't go through with the move. But my wife was all about giving our son the choice, even if it meant he'd rather stay with his mom. She thought it should be his call. I was a bit hesitant at first, but she kept saying her mom and therapist agreed with her. Eventually, I caved and presented the option to my son. He didn't want us to move, but if we did, he wanted to stay with his mom. And when he made his choice, things got tense. My wife lost it, yelling at him while he was in the bathroom. He ended up locking himself in his room, and I just felt awful. Then my wife turned it on me, saying she never told me to give him that choice, denying she ever said anything like that. I tried to argue, but it was no use. Things settled down after that, at least for a bit. My wife struggled to finish her bachelor's degree, even getting in trouble for plagiarism. I started helping her out with her papers and tests, and she ended up graduating with a grade point average around 2.4. Plus, she started taking Prozac, thinking it would help with her anger problems. Honestly, I believe she was getting better. We started making all these plans, thinking things were finally slowing down. Then my dad decided to get his land surveying license in Florida, and he landed a good job right off the bat. His first day was May 16th. We all headed down to Florida in late March, but me, my son, and my dad came back up so my son could finish the school year. Meanwhile, my wife stayed down in Florida with our 1-year-old daughter. She wanted to spend time with her stepmom, considering her health situation. And again, everything seemed fine between us. I genuinely thought we were still head over heels in love. I was even ready to let my son stay with his mom, so she could be closer to her family. So back in early May, my dad and I decided to quit our jobs and get ready for the big move down to Florida. My dad planned to stick around temporarily until he sold his houses and could build a new one next to our Florida home. He made the long drive down on Friday, May 6th, while I stayed behind. But then on Saturday, May 7th, everything came crashing down. My wife called me up to drop the bombshell that she didn't love me anymore, and hadn't for a while. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was devastated, to say the least. I cried a lot, trying to process what she was saying. But what struck me most was how indifferent she seemed to my pain. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 3, and it was gut-wrenching to hear. That evening, I gathered up what little courage I had left to ask if she still wanted me to come to Florida. Her response? A nonchalant sure. Then, I brought up our daughter and what would happen if things didn't work out between us. She assured me she wouldn't keep our daughter from me, but she intended to stay in Florida with her. That crushed me even more. I turned to my friends and family for support, and thankfully, they were there for me. Turns out, my wife had been cheating on me, and someone even shared screenshots of her texts about it. As soon as I found out, I reached out to a lawyer to understand my options and started the divorce process. Things took a dark turn on Tuesday, May 10th, when my wife let our daughter get access to her psychiatric medication. We had to call poison control and rinse her mouth out to keep her safe. Despite that scare, my wife asked my dad, who was now in Florida, to watch our daughter so she could have a me day. She left around 9 a.m. and didn't come back until midnight. Little did I know, during that time, she went to see my friend James, who lived 2 hours away, and their emotional affair turned physical. The next day, my dad decided to move out. It wasn't until I confronted my wife about the affair that she finally admitted to it. I had my suspicions, especially when James never responded to me about the divorce proceedings before my wife confessed. She kept insisting she wanted me to choose her and claimed it wasn't a sudden decision. But in reality, she was just trying to ease her own guilt. Now, I'm in a tough spot. I lost my job, don't have custody of my child, and my dad isn't around to support me. She has her car in Florida, and I'm not a homeowner like I thought I'd be. Plus, I had to rack up lawyer fees on my credit card. But there's a glimmer of hope. Thanks to child custody laws, Kentucky, not Florida, will determine the custody of our 14-month-old daughter. My lawyer is pretty confident we can get sole custody. My soon-to-be ex-wife wants to reconcile, but I'm not having it. She keeps reaching out, saying she never wanted a divorce and that I took things too far. She even told my dad that if we work things out, I have to remove my name from the Florida home's deed so she can have full ownership. She claims her mom will always despise me and wants me to come to Florida to sort things out. But she won't come back to Kentucky unless I drop the divorce proceedings. Honestly, I have no intention of getting back together with her. The hardest part? I can't even bring myself to cry. I want to let it all out, but every time the tears come, I feel guilty for letting myself end up in this mess. If I hadn't reached out to James, maybe my wife wouldn't have cheated on me. And what's worse is knowing she did it to hurt me deliberately, picking the one person who could deal the most damage to my self-confidence. It's a tough pill to swallow, but that's where I'm at.